The great state of Minnesota has contributed two things to national politics so far this year. First, they have contributed Republican presidential contenders, former Republican Governor Tim Pawlenty, who declared his candidacy today, and current member of Congress Michelle Bachmann. Ms. Bachmann making a cameo appearance in Mr. Pawlenty's rollout article in Time magazine today. In that article, Mr. Pawlenty's former chief of staff says, quote, "Michelle Bachmann's going to be a pain in the ass in Iowa." Nice. So that's one thing that Minnesota has contributed to our national politics this year. Two Republican presidential contenders whose campaigns curse each other out to the press. Thank you, Minnesota. The other thing Minnesota has contributed to our nation's politics this year is a new way of looking at Republican anti-gay politics. Even though Minnesota is thought of as being Minnesota nice, even though it's thought of as a bluish-tinged state, and Minneapolis was ranked this year by The Advocate magazine as the gayest city in America, the religious right is alive and well in the land of 10,000 lakes, and they decided to take advantage of big Republican majorities in the Minnesota House and Senate this year to push through an anti-gay marriage constitutional amendment. And that push has produced Minnesota's other big contribution to national politics this year: the viral video, nationally resonant, of straight people, straight legislators, in some cases even straight Republican legislators, making an impassioned case against conservative anti-gay policy being turned into law in Minnesota.
We have to be careful about trying to enshrine our beliefs, however religiously valid we may believe them to be, in the Minnesota Constitution. And what I'm hearing today and what I heard on Friday was largely a religious justification for a change in the Minnesota Constitution. I don't think that's right. I don't think it's fair. I think it departs from our tradition. Just ask yourself, not now in the glare of the Capitol and caucuses and interest groups, but ask yourself if it's true that sexual orientation is innate, God-given, then what does it mean to the moral force of your argument? And I guess to put it in the vernacular, what I would ask is, how many more gay people does God have to create before we ask ourselves whether or not God actually wants them around? And
please keep applause to yourselves.
And I truly believe that in a generation, maybe not even a generation, but certainly many generations from now, if we pass this, if we put it on the ballot, if this becomes part of our Constitution, history will judge us all very, very harshly.
Representative Steve Simon, a Democrat in Minnesota, making the case earlier this month against the proposed anti-gay constitutional amendment in that state. That speech has been viewed more than 500,000 times on YouTube. And how many state assembly speeches can you say that about? There's one other statement I want you to see before we bring on our guests for the interview tonight. This is a state rep from Minnesota named John Kriesel, Staff Sergeant John Kriesel. He lost both his legs in an IED blast in Fallujah. He is a Republican. And I think what he said about this is really, really worth seeing.
I went to Iraq. I was in an incident. I nearly died. I remember laying there, looking down and seeing my legs mangled and pretty much guaranteeing that I was a done deal. I thought that's where my life was going to end. And I remember thinking of my wife and my kids. That's what crossed my mind. And that's what kept me fighting. This amendment doesn't represent what I went to fight for. This doesn't represent that. Hear that out there? That's the America I fought for, and I'm proud of that. A little bit earlier, I had this passed around. It's a photo of a gentleman named Corporal Andrew Wilfahrt. He gave his life in Afghanistan on February 27th of this year. He hit an improvised explosive device while keeping us safe, protecting our freedoms, giving us the right to have this debate tonight. He was gay. He was gay. I don't know about you guys, but I cannot look at this family and look at this picture and say, you know what, Corporal, you were good enough to fight for your country and give your life, but you were not good enough to marry the person you love. I can't do that. I cannot do that, and I won't do that. If there was a hell no button right here, I would press it. Years down the road, this is going to be, people are going to look back on this and know that this was a pivotal point in history for our state, for our families, for our communities, for people's happiness and freedom. And And when my grandkids look at me and they say, "Grandpa, where'd you stand on this issue?" I'll be proud to look at them and say, "You know what, I was on the right side of history. I was on the right side of history."
It's one of the only Republicans who voted no on the anti-gay rights Minnesota constitutional amendment. His name is John Kriesel. He's an Iraq veteran who lost both his legs to an IED in Fallujah. The man whose picture John Kriesel handed out to the whole state assembly before he made that speech, which you saw him reference there, that man who was pictured in this picture that he handed out was Corporal Andrew Wilfahrt of Rosemount, Minnesota. Andrew Wilfahrt's parents have been a force of nature in this fight in their home state. Joining us now for the interview tonight are Jeff and Lori Wilfahrt, the parents of Corporal Andrew Wilfahrt, who was killed on February 27th in Kandahar in Afghanistan. Mr. and Mrs. Wilfahrt, thank you both so much for being with us.
You're welcome.
Thank you for having us on, Ms. Maddow.
How important was it for you to have an Iraq veteran, this Republican representative, Mr. Kriesel, taking the stand he took in your son's name, distributing his picture as part of what he was explaining as his stance on this issue?
Well, it was very important. It was really impactful, I feel. And it was nice to have someone on that side take our side. I think military people stick up for each other. They understand things that the rest of us don't. And as our experience with our son and the stories that we've heard about him is different things matter to people in the military. Things like sexuality aren't important. It's the friendship and the trust, loyalty that they have for one another, the willingness and ability to protect each other. That is what it's important. And it's a loyalty maybe the rest of us don't understand.
Mr. Wilford,
so it was very important that he spoke up.
I'm sorry, excuse my interruption. Mr. Wilford, I understand that you testified in both the House and the Senate against this anti-gay rights constitutional amendment. I know that from reading your testimony, I know you referenced some of what your wife just described about how veterans view this issue differently. How was that experience of testifying for you?
Well, I'll go to that in just a second. First thing I want to say is that the United States Army treated this family very well. If other people have other experiences, I can't say that's what we experienced. They were very dignified and were very good to us. When I testified before the Senate committee, I tried to use reason, logic, heartfelt. I described the events of that day. And it was pretty obvious watching most of the Republican members of that committee fiddle with papers and otherwise be distracted that they were not listening. When I came to the House, I decided that there was no point making an appeal directly to these people because their minds were set up. They're in lockstep. Most of them are a freshman class, the far right. They don't want to hear the arguments. So in that case, I geared my speech specifically to speak beyond them to the veterans of Minnesota, to indicate that somebody was toying with the Constitution and treating it in what I felt was an unfair way. As it turns out, that really got me nothing. I have had little or no response from the veteran societies of the state of Minnesota, at least so far. The only positive feedback I've gotten from veterans has been from gay veterans who are unidentified but are in the metro area community, and they've reached out to me and given me support. So I'm a little disappointed, I guess, that I wasn't able to connect with them. Maybe I said something to offend them or alienate them. If I did, I apologize to them. It wasn't my intent. I was only trying to reach out to people who have actually taken an oath to the Constitution and been willing to shed blood for it.
Mrs. Wilfahrt, can I? And
all the things it's in.
I'm sorry again. Mrs. Wilfahrt, can I ask you about some of the items that I can see in the shot with you two there? I understand that some of those items there with you came from the soldiers who served with your son in Afghanistan. Is that right?
Right. The flag you see behind us was signed by everybody in his unit to him, notes to him. And so they sent that back with one of the soldiers that was able to be at the funeral at Fort Snelling the day that Andrew was buried. So that's the flag. And then the boxes you see behind us are all of Andrew's possessions that came from Hawaii, where he was based. So they came about 3 weeks ago, and as of yet we haven't gone through them. Waiting for that moment, I guess, when we can.
Because of this vote that happened in the legislature, this anti-gay rights measure, anti-gay marriage measure that you've both spoken out against in your son's name, is going to be on the ballot. But it's not on the ballot this year. It's next November, and that means there will be a year and a half of campaigning in Minnesota before a vote on people's rights in the state. What are you two expecting in terms of how Minnesota is going to deal with a year and a half of those kind of politics around this issue, and do you expect to stay involved in Andrew's name?
I expect we will stay involved. I'm not sure yet how or with what organization, but I know that we will. I think it could be 18 months of ugliness. There's going to be a lot of money coming into this state on both sides, hopefully, not just on one side. And I think it could get really nasty. And I wonder if Minnesota has the stomach for it.
As I understand it, the Minnesota Family Council is trying to drum up roughly $4.7 million to promote the amendment. This money is of unknown source. Nothing's being disclosed. Everybody's icon of marriage, Mr. Newt Gingrich, was just here. For $1,000 he could attend. You may recall that he got glittered. I have no idea what kind of money the National Organization for Marriage is bringing in, but it's big, and again, we don't know where the money's coming from. Times are rough here. The gay community is large, but I don't think they got the kind of money to fight it alone. Whether or not other Minnesotans will step up and help push money back at them, because you know it's going to come down to some nasty stuff on TV, misrepresentations, characterizations, false religious doctrines. It's going to be ugly.
Jeff and Lori Wilfahrt.
We could use some.
Let's go ahead, sir.
Well, we could use some help from anybody out there who's listening. There's a lot of good organizations here in the state. I think there's a lot of decent humans around here, and I think Representative Kriesel is #1. Also, I'd like to thank Representative Kelly, Representative Murray, and Representative Smith, all Republicans, who I think stood up and did the right thing.
Jeff and Lori Wilfahrt, the parents of Corporal Andrew Wilfahrt, thank you for being willing to join us tonight, sharing your story with us, and thank you for your activism. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem to speak the truth.
We will be right back.
Thank you.
Thank you.